In the early 1990s, Sega experimented with racecar arcade simulators and actually had a small niche of the arcade market with these games. Within the decade of the 1990s in gaming, in particular the early to mid-1990s, the Daytona USA franchise was arguably the best known from Sega, especially from early installments of the Daytona arcade machines were known for their realism and value for money spent on playing a game. In 1992, Sega announced that it had made partnerships with specialty manufacturers to create a new type of racing simulation game. Sega United States leadership held meetings with the Sega Japanese leadership to create a new concept for racing in arcades and eventually in consoles. Combined Sega leadership commenced negotiations with representatives of the Daytona 500 for a license to use likenesses for a new gaming franchise. However, to keep the costs spent by Sega to a minimum, an actual license for gaming wasn't acquired. That's why the games never had actual sponsors, drivers, or cars from real-life NASCAR sources, but a likeness or tribute or even spin-off instead. Japanese leadership from Sega made another requirement that the new Sega game be better than Ridge Racer, a racing simulator developed by Namco released on the Sony PlayStation. Despite it being in arcades, a good number of sales from Ridge Racer came from consoles. Sega released Daytona USA in 1993, with a port being put on the Saturn in 1995. Sega's investments paid off and the game was a critical and crucial success. Even with console sales, the original arcade was a fantastic experience for gamers and many remarked how good the experience was. In 2002, nearly 10 years after the original release of Daytona USA, Sega released a report mentioning that it had become one of the most successful arcade games ever developed and released by any gaming producer. In 1996, building upon the success of the original, the Championship Circuit Edition was released only for the Sega Saturn. Due in part to the phenomenal success of the original, extraordinary demand harder that the game be released in Europe first, with American and Japanese editions being released later on. Critics mentioned that the game was an impressive sequel that improved upon details from the original game. The game was so well received and so iconic that in the Sega Saturn Video Game Fighters Megamix, the Hornet car from Daytona USA is a secret character within the fighting roster. That's how much of an impact Daytona USA had in the early to mid-1990s for Sega. Daytona USA 2 Battle on the Edge was released in 1998, and unlike Championship Circuit, was released in both for arcades and console. Due to the success from the game, Daytona USA 2 was supposed to be released on the Sega Dreamcast, but according to articles published in video game magazines at the time, these plans never came of anything, and a new game, Daytona USA 2001, took its place. Daytona USA 2001 was released in Japan for the Dreamcast in the year of 2000. And with the United States and European release in 2001. Sega originally planned for this installment of the Daytona franchise to be a complete reboot to the series, with all of the courses from the original Daytona USA in Championship Circuit Edition. 3 new tracks were specifically designed for this installment as well. However, much like the problems that plagued the console throughout its lifetime, similar problems affected this installment of Daytona, as controls of the game were criticized when compared to prior installments of the Daytona franchise. It was considered a decent game, but critics mentioned that it wasn't anything like the iconic original or the Championship Circuit Edition. Sometimes a character can be forgotten, even when they were the first to be remembered.